Many actions or many of our decisions, daily decision, is driven by our ego, and you will realize that the ego is not necessarily a bad thing per se because it's there to protect us, but it can be also negative if we don't use it appropriately. So, welcome to this channel. I am Patrice Tankam, and this channel is designed to share with you how the universe operates and how we can better ourselves through the principles of the universe, and by doing so, better people and the relationships with people around us. So today I want to touch on the point of the ego. And the ego is something that is very powerful. I mentioned in one of the episodes the subconscious mind, and the ego is part of the subconscious mind. And things of our persona, things of our personality, if you will, or things how we see ourselves, or how we perceive ourselves, or how we project ourselves to the outside world. For example, I am the CEO of Jace. I am maybe a dad, so that means I have the more power over my kids. I mentioned the CEO. That means I have more power over my employee. I am Jace. I am that. So it's really our representation in the society. And as I mentioned, the ego is not necessarily a bad thing. But if we focus too much on our ego, listening to our ego, we really miss something that is fundamental to our well-being, which is really our soul, our inner self. Because the ego, again, is not who we are. It's just a projection of who we want to show to the rest of the world. You will realize that most of the time, we project ourselves out there because we want people to appreciate us. But when we have the time to be calm and outside of all the noise of the society, now we come to deal with our inner self. And we see that most of the time we have things within us that are very, create a lot of suffering when we come to face them, when we come to face our inner self. For example, things like shame, or things if we don't appreciate ourselves that much, or they are part of our body that we don't like. But when we present ourselves out there, we want people to see things that are opposite to what we really are. So our ego is what is really driving us. We can when we post our pictures on social media, for example, we expect people to comment, oh, you look beautiful, you look this, you're gorgeous, or things like that, because that is kind of a flattery to our ego. It makes our ego happy about it. But on the other end, or on the other side of the screen, you also have people who are looking at the pictures of you and also comparing themselves to you, and their ego is telling, oh, I'm not good enough. This person is very successful. I am, and I am not. So you see, the information, whether the message that you send out, the intent was to please your ego, but by doing so, you also trigger the ego of the other person who is on the other side of the screen looking at your pictures. Sometimes people will even comment, you look gorgeous. That's to please your ego, but within them, they also feel like they also have the feeling of not good enough, not sufficient, not successful enough. Why is all of that? So that is really where the ego becomes something that is negative. The negative aspect of the ego is really in comparing who we are with other people. Is really in that process that the ego could really become challenging. And for example, when I talk to my kids, I could give a direction to my kids, and they might challenge it. You see, so when they challenge it, the first reactions, and my ego will directly, instantly get up and say, Why is my kid is challenging what I'm saying? I am the dad, I have the authority over my kids. Why are they challenging what I'm telling them to do? They should just do it without questioning it. So that is part of the ego. Even if the kid is right about what they are saying, our first reactions, which is driven by our ego, is first to stand up to our power, is to stand up to the way we see ourselves in the society. As the parents, you should have authority over your kids. But the reality is that within us, and if we go back to the principle even of who we are within us, which is our inner self, our soul, if you really calm the ego and listen to our inner self, what our soul is telling us, in that case, we can reflect a little bit back on what the kids was telling us, or how people actually challenging our opinions. Because when people challenge our opinion, we become very aggressive. We cannot be a CEO and the employee come and challenge the way we perceive things. We take it very disrespectful, and we become very aggressive about that. You see, and in those circumstances, it's not really who we are, but it's the projection of who we are to the outside world. Because within us, there is this inner self, this soul, that is more calm, that is more peaceful. And so there is this competition between the ego, with who we want to show to the outside world, and we will also call the I, myself, I, as the representation in the society. But there's also and that I, the ego, is very loud. It's very loud. It's always very dominant. It's always want to have something to say. And it doesn't want to give the opportunity to the soul, to the inner self, to actually express itself. So that's why usually all our decision in the daily life is usually driven by our ego mindset. So it's driven by our ego. And so here, what is inside the ego? So if we go back there, the ego is everything. Some of the egos are coming from some things that come when we are born. So we could be maybe we have some very creative talent, or talent in doing things, or talent of doing that. And so that is part of things that we are born with. So that could come from also our past experience. Some of the things, as I always discuss, that I am a believer of reincarnation. So I always think that we all have some other past life before this current life. So everything that we carry, and that's our soul things, was important from the past life, and that we need to our current life, is part of who we are, is part of our personality, part of our character. So the ego, this could also get into the umbrella of the ego in general. So that is part of the ego. And they also add the aspect of the programming, all the programming, all the way the society, the way we grew up, our environment, or all the things that we were taught that, okay, this is how things should be, and that's something that we learn over time. It becomes part of our character, our personality, or part of our inner vibrational field. I mentioned the vibrational field because, again, is the vibrational field is the way we communicate with the universe, through vibration. So the ego is also part of that. But the ego is also the representation of who we see ourselves in the society. I mentioned, for example, CEO or different type of things that will trigger us every time somebody challenges us about our opinion or about the way we see things. You will realize that we become very aggressive, first of all. And every time you get into that state, try to calm yourself and ask yourself, is that your ego reacting to this opinion? Are you really open to other perspectives? And most of the time we are not, because even though other people, it's always good to have different perspectives. It's always good to have other people's opinions, because it's important. That is part of things that help us to analyze things in the more global point of view. I always say 2 brains is better than 1. So you cannot think that your perspective is the best or is the only way of doing things. Other people might have a better perspective, or maybe a middle ground between 2 different perspectives might be the way to go. But in general, when somebody challenges our perspective or our opinion, the first reaction is the aggressivity. You become very aggressive because our ego is saying that the ego doesn't want to change who we are. The ego, as I mentioned, the ego is the character that we define, that define us to the outside world, is the intersection between us and the outside world. And so that ego want to preserve that things that is on, things that is part of your character. It doesn't want to change that. So every time somebody want to change that character, it's very difficult. We feel very aggressive. We feel like somebody is attacking us, something like that. And so what to do in that kind of situation? It's difficult to get out of the ego. As I mentioned, the ego is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's the way we react or the way we obey to ego is maybe what needs to be not changed but understand. Okay, so when we are confronting a situation where the ego is expressing itself loud, the first thing that we want to do, I think, is to take a deep breath and really ask ourselves whether the other person's opinion is valid or not. And the way to do that is to get outside of the noise, because again, sometimes if it's in public, we usually more aggressive than if we are just alone. For example, if you are having a conversation and you challenge my opinion, it's very different. My reaction could be a little bit different from if we are in public space and then you challenge my opinion in front of everybody else. You can see that the level of aggressivity will be much higher, because in that case the ego feel like it's really getting attacked, not by one person, but we also spreading that information to all the other people in public, in the public space. So in that case, so you can see that now if you reduce the number of people who are interacting with you, now you can see that the ego will react a little bit differently. And so to even get rid of the ego is to completely detach from everybody else. So to find a quiet place where you are just alone and really ask the question to your inner self, to your soul. Is this something and reflect to what the person said about maybe your opinion or the other perspective of what the person said. And most of the time you will realize that it was just your reaction or your aggressiveness was just part of your ego. So there was no reason to be aggressive. There was no reason to react the way you reacted. And based on that, you kind of learn how to kind of detach and quiet your ego a little bit. And that's why it's usually better not to react directly, but to take a step back to reflect. And to take a step back to reflect is to get outside of the noise. Find a quiet place, take a deep breath, and try to think or submit that information to your inner self. Most of the time, your inner self will tell you what the truth, because your inner self is very quiet. It likes quietness, and it will usually tell you what is the truth, outside of all the noise and all the outside things that is happening on the outside noise, and also all the ego, what your ego self wants. So that is one of the perspectives that I think is important. And really to navigate through the world, we need to understand what our ego is doing, what is the ego. And again, it's not a bad thing, and there is no way we can live without ego. And I cannot pretend we have ego at all different levels, even the spiritual ego, because I can say, okay, I'm spiritually more mature than you, but that's just part of the ego. There is no quantification in terms of level of spirituality. We are all developing at a different state, and that are not even comparable. So you cannot pretend that spiritually you are egoless, for example, or say that you don't have any ego. Nobody can live without ego, because ego is part of who we are. but we just need to understand how our ego is driving our daily decision, and to be able to understand that there's that competition that is happening all the time in our daily life between our ego, which is the I, and our inner self, which is more quieter than we think. And our inner self really speak only when we give it the space, the quiet environment that is needed to be able to express itself. But our ego is very loud. If we always want to overspeak or use the whole space, right? So you need to find that middle ground to be able to let your inner self a little bit speak more often than your ego. And in that case, we try to find a balance. Our ego is there to protect us. It doesn't want to change. It doesn't want to be challenged. It thinks that the way it is the perfect way to be, so it doesn't want to change, it doesn't want to challenge. So every time you want to change the ego, it will do everything to tell you that no, you don't want to change. I'm happy the way I am, so I don't want to change. And so you need to find that middle ground where you can navigate between your ego and the inner self to be able to make better decisions and to be able to navigate through challenges in life. They are all good, but just learning how to navigate and have the understanding of how we define the ego and what it's doing in your life. Okay, so with that, I hope this helped until the next episode.